In Parashat Vaeira, we are in the midst of the Exodus story, featuring the epic clash between Moses and Pharaoh. And there are weeks in which our Torah portion speaks directly, unequivocally to the current moment we find ourselves in. This is one of those weeks. The Pharaoh we are dealing with arose to power in last week's portion. Vayakom melech chadash al Mitzrayim, asher lo yada et Yosef. A new king arose over Egypt who did not know Joseph. This new king immediately becomes fearful of the Israelites, of those who are not like him. We are too numerous, too entrenched in society. With no checks on his abilities, he extends the reach of his tyrannical power. The Hebrews must be controlled, enslaved, made to build great structures that attest to Pharaoh's might. Every firstborn male of the Hebrews must be eliminated, thrown into the Nile. This Pharaoh has advisors who placate his every desire, stroke his ego, and prop him up to appear even more powerful. Past rulers of Egypt worked with Joseph, and they attempted to lead with structure, graciousness, and even a bit of humility. This Pharaoh rules with chaos, greed, and arrogance. And as we see in our Torah this week, this Pharaoh, even when confronted with plagues that hurt his family and his people, this Pharaoh refuses to back down. This Pharaoh, they are the sun and the stars. Everything revolves around them. All of the people in the land, Israelite and Egyptian alike, are filled with fear for what this tyrant might do next. It is under this Pharaoh that Moses is called upon by God to free the Israelites from bondage. When Moses first returns from Egypt and tells the Israelites about God's plan for them, they are ecstatic. Finally, our God has heard our cries. We will be free. They are hopeful, ready to turn the page on this chapter of their lives. But after delivering the news to the Israelites, Moses and Aaron confront Pharaoh, and they are predictably denied. In fact, Pharaoh increases the workload of the Israelites, making their daily building even more difficult. But, as we know, God and Moses aren't done yet. God appears to Moses and reaffirms God's commitment to taking the Israelites out of Egypt, to uphold the covenant made with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and fulfill their destiny as a holy people. God wants Moses to reassure everyone that it will all be okay, even after this initial failure. And it is here that we read this devastating verse from Torah. Vayedaber Moshe, bein el bnei Yisrael. But when Moses told this to the Israelites, v'lo sham'u el Moshe mikotzer ruach ume'avodah kasheh. They would not listen to Moses, their spirits crushed by cruel bondage. The people are exhausted, even more so by the increased workload from Pharaoh. And in that exhaustion, they have become hopeless and despondent. How are they to continue to believe that Moses and this God of theirs will actually lead them to freedom? Their belief in the promise of redemption has been shut down, snuffed out. Their spirits are crushed. In their eyes, there is no hope. The phrase that Torah uses to describe the Israelites in this moment, kotzer ruach, can have several different meanings, as our commentators make clear for us. Rashi in the 11th century France notes that the Israelites experienced an anguish of spirit. If one is in anguish, their breath comes in short gasps, and they cannot draw long breaths. In this interpretation, the Israelites are physically short of breath, too exhausted by their increased workload. Ramban, in 13th century Spain, sees the Israelites feeling an impatience of spirit because they were so grieving the loss of future redemption. They wanted freedom so badly and were completely crushed by Pharaoh's actions that they gave up, not prepared to have to wait patiently for freedom. Finally, Giscuni in 13th century France notes that Pharaoh's cruelty made the Israelites forget their dreams of freedom, or at least improved conditions, by burdening them with additional hard labor. The Israelites have forgotten about any hopes and dreams that they had for the winds of change to take them to freedom. Whether their ruach, their breath, spirit, or wind, whether it is shortened or crushed, impatient or anguished, it is clear that the Israelites have fallen into deep despair about their situation. In talking with members of this community, in looking around our city and our country this week, there seems to be a similar deep despair taking hold. Although overjoyed at several hostages being returned to their families this week, and please God, several more tomorrow, the ceasefire between Israel and Hamas remains tenuous and relies completely upon leaders who have put their own political ambitions ahead of their people's. In our own country, a familiar Pharaoh has returned, wreaking havoc over the course of just 5 days in office. As I think about those who will be most directly impacted by these dangerous and deranged actions, trans children, asylum seekers, refugees, people in need of reproductive care, and so many other groups of people, I can see their ruach, their spirit, being shortened, crushed, anguished. And in witnessing their ruach diminished, I feel my own grow tired and weak. There is much to despair about right now. But if we look back to our Torah, we are reminded that the despair of our ancestors did not last long. As Rabbi Rachel Barenblatt notes on this week's Parsha, our Torah story comes this week to remind us that Kotzer Ruach, the crushed spirits of the Israelites, is not the end of the story. Being in dire straits, unable to breathe, unable to focus, hearts and souls unable to hope, is not the end of the story. On the contrary, she writes, it's the first step toward liberation. In our shortness of breath or crushed spirit, we may have started to internalize messages that we can't do anything about the state of our city, about the state of our country or our world. And that may be true only if we allow our kotzer as well. But to take that first step, to start the work that will help us move forward, that will help us love and support our community members most under attack, we have to protect our own ruach. We have to protect our breath, our spirit, and our winds of change. So first, our breath. In our tradition, the breath is holy. Just as God breathed life into Adam and Eve, we can experience each breath we take as a holy act of sustaining life, of recognizing our blessings in this world. This holy act of sustaining ourselves through the breath, this is the opposite of how I found myself this week. Literally holding my breath, watching the news or scrolling on social media, afraid of what devastating news I might encounter. And maybe you've had that experience as well. And yet, in coming back to our breath, we come back to ourselves. We reaffirm our own humanity in a world that is increasingly inhumane just by coming back to our breath. Second, our spirit. We are attending to our spirit right now by marking Shabbat, by being in community, by pausing in sacred Jewish time to reflect on our lives, to reconnect with ourselves and with our loved ones, and renew ourselves for the journey ahead. The Israelites, they had an impatience of spirit, and they should have been impatient. And we too should be impatient. We should be impatient with the current state of the world, the hatred that is growing, the destruction of so many pieces of society that we hold dear. We should always be impatient in the face of injustice. But when that injustice comes back at us, when we feel its wrath, we must not lose our spirit. The invitation here is to lean into our tradition, to lean into community, to lean into Shabbat or anything that will bring laughter and joy and connection and spirit into our lives. Lastly, our winds of change. We know from some wise ones before us that the answer, my friend, is blowing in the wind. And also that a change is going to come. Oh, yes, it will. The winds of change may feel elusive, outside of our control, and yet, just like the arc of the moral universe only bends towards justice because we push and we pull and we fight to make it happen, so too with the winds of change. Through our actions, our everyday, ordinary actions with our families and communities, we stir up the winds of change. Here at CBE, the climate team and the dismantling racism team and the refugee task force and the democracy team and other projects and initiatives are all stirring up the winds of change right now, but they also need some more willing people to make some more movement. So whether it is with one of these groups or others, protecting our ruach, protecting our winds of change, it is better done and more sweetly, more joyously done in community. Our Torah tells the story of a people, our people, with kotzer ruach, with crushed spirits because of a vindictive, greedy, and oppressive Pharaoh. With increased labor, they had to give up all hopes for freedom. But our Torah then teaches that the despair felt by the Israelites was just the first step towards sweeping liberation, the initial move to begin our march toward the promised land. Their ruach, their breath, spirit, and winds of change were renewed. And the same can be true for us. That in a week such as this, in moments of deep despair, we must protect our ruach, our breath, our spirit, our own winds of change. In a week that we also remembered the life and legacy of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., I will end with his words from his 1964 Nobel Peace Prize acceptance speech. I believe that unarmed truth and unconditional love will have the final word in reality. This is why right temporarily defeated is stronger than evil triumphant. May we heed his words and bring our ruach to this moment. Shabbat shalom.